being raised, not just in this space, but countrywide, relate to the fact that the task force and even the Mungatana initiative are viewed to have been the subject of something that happened, and therefore it's like reactionary. But as I said, that's now water under the bridge. I think from what you have described to us, and from even the prior conversations among us, there is that critical thing of can the state take this opportunity to have regulation which, although it might look like it is very objective and all that, but the state has a foot in terms of being able to kind of control, to some extent, the religious sector. And of course, because here the emphasis is in this debate, the emphasis is the church, and this is the majority of the 80% or so of citizens in our country. So I think in terms of whether it is the Mungatana bill, whether it is what you have very eloquently proposed in terms of the draft policy, the draft bill, regulations, one has to really look at them very, very, very carefully, because as there is now public participation again, when they are presented to Parliament, it is likely that there will be some changes and so on and so forth. So I think one must still emphasize that we are very careful, very deliberate, so that what Shakahola represented is not used by the state to have some foothold into how the church can be regulated in a negative way. And of course, there's another backdrop of during elections, the religious, the political people come into the churches and they try to influence them so that they can help them in terms of the elections and in politics and so on. And therefore, one again has to look at all this, the policy, the bill, the regulations, to be sure that they will not allow a foothold, a greater foothold of the political people within the religious space and the church space for this matter. I think if there is the emphasis on self-regulation, I think that is the most critical thing, so that really the balance is for self-regulation, and that becomes very clear, because even within the Religious Affairs Commission, it is not a constitutional commission, because if it was a constitutional commission, that is a commission within the constitution, like IEBC, like the PSC, TSC. If it was within the constitution, then it would be clear that it's a strong. But even when sometimes there are fewer people in government, we have seen in commissions where those people tend to have some dominance. So that is also something else to look at very, very carefully, the structure of that Religious Affairs Commission, to look at the roles of the government functionaries within them, so that it is clear that the representation that you have very articulately brought forward in terms of the umbrella organizations, so that becomes very, very, very clear. You know, we have seen the EACC sometimes, you know, being kind of dominated, you know, by government, the government officials. Even IPOA itself, which you mentioned, we have seen that it is not always easy for them to kind of control the police. So I think it will be necessary, therefore, to look at that religious commission to be sure that, of course, the best situation would be if it was within the constitution, just like the freedom of worship and all those issues that were mentioned earlier in terms of the constitutional, the preamble, Article 8, Article 32, articles about you can't discriminate on basis of religion and so on and so forth. Then even the umbrella organizations, I think it is important that the law there makes it in such a way that they may not also make it difficult for incoming denominations. And you know, there was a talk within an earlier presentation. There was talk of sometimes it is thought that the dominant, the mainstream, what we call the mainstream, can also have a problem in terms of admitting, you know, what are thought to be small churches or denominations and so on and so forth. So even in that space, so that there isn't self-regulation which advantages just the mainstream and disadvantages others. Of course, I think we have to be also very careful about this special criminality issuing from things that are being done religiously, because if it is terrorism, there is law to look, there is law to deal with that. If it is noise pollution, if it is you know, for all those laws, even if you teach, you have religious content, just like other secular content, which makes it difficult, which you know, you make people do wrong things. There is also law for that. So I think it is perhaps not good to come up with criminal with criminal stuff in a law about religion. It should be in the penal code, or it should be, you know, in those places, so that it is law which applies to anybody who does things of that particular kind. And it's not enough for the communications authority to say that people are doing wrong things and saying this is religious freedom. The DPP or whoever should be able to prove that this is unacceptable, just like if somebody else. Because I'm saying this just to indicate that we can begin to have laws that are specific to the region, and we are not we the state and religion separation, and we begin actually to undermine religion through such specific laws. But they should be broad, and they should be, you know, laws just like in the penal code, and they reside there. They reside there. If I can just to kind of, because so that I don't take too long, the academic standards thing. I think what you were told in North Rift is valid, because even in the some people who have done a lot of mechanics or who have done a lot of plumbing, that prior knowledge can be certified. So even as even as the umbrella organizations look at these people, then that is also something to be, you know, careful about, because yes, we don't want people don't have, I mean, they have rogue doctrine. One even can't call it doctrine, to really confuse people and to do all the negative stuff. But what I think I have heard you say, and also Kanjama, I have heard you say, Senior Counsel, is we need to look at what some of the proposals that you have made in terms of organizing, if one can just talk about the church, organizing the church for the sake of the church, so that there is a better, like if it is the disputes, people don't keep on disputing and doing terrible things and being used as you look at those Christians, they can't agree. They what do they preach? Like Mahatma Gandhi once said, if Christians really did what Christ was about, then he himself would also be a Christian. So I think we should also look at what that task force has done in terms of there are elements there which help the church to become, if I can say, quote, quote, better. And that is positive. And I think, but also clarify that there are no things about taxation, so that, because that's one other thing. The reporting, that is important. Even these faiths regulate themselves before they go under the Societies Act, because most of them were registered there. Then there is also that bad practice of one denomination which is registered itself registering some other many, so that they are under it. It's like they are under it and they pay quote quote a tax to the person who is already registered. So that things like those ones, so that there is a kind of better order, and therefore I think it will be important for that Mungatana thing to really be stepped down, and then as we do public participation, there's a better, because when you went out, like you said, you would have like 100 people in a county town hall, so that now there is more people discussing, so that there is good consensus, and also to know that without that consensus, I think people will really, particularly the Christian church, will really think that this is a law which is taking away from what they have from the Constitution and from, of course, from our belief in terms of what the Christian church is about. But we thank you for your eloquence and also the work in terms of bringing out those issues. And I think as we continue to the debate, it will be clearer and clearer that this is not something to do harm, but all those questions to be looked at so that people are comfortable. It's a huge step in the country, and let's go well within what eventually will be done. And I yield, and I don't know whether Bishop Ndichu is around. If he was, who is also a lawyer, and in some discussions, he has some issues to also share. If he was around, maybe he could also say something, and I yield.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jamhuri, you can check if he's in the...
he is around, and I have extended the mic.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much for that submission. And even as we give Senior Counsel an opportunity to give his rejoinder, he might also even give us a good idea of, since he's a Christian as well, how well we would organize thorough public participation in the church, so that some of those things, the feelings that people have, like, is this thing coming to crush our faith? Are they trying to regulate our sermons, etc., etc.? Welcome, Senior Counsel, to rejoin.
Okay, very well. Thank you for that. I think Prof, who has also been my teacher in the past, has given very insightful comments as usual, and explored various aspects that have to be carefully looked at. And I think they have all been very useful and helpful comments. One thing that we are aware, those of us who are in the task force, is the danger of the work of the task force being conflated with what output has come from Mungatana. And in fact, one of the things that I've had to do in several forums of religious leaders is to explain the difference, because when the task force report came out and the bill, we had several sessions where we explained the task force report, and there was a lot of very positive acceptance of the work of the task force, and the religious leaders looked to be in substantial support, at least in the forums I attended. And then after a few weeks, we started receiving a screenshot saying, "Is this your bill?" And we were also in shock, because we were seeing contents of a bill that was not of the presidential task. Discovered that actually there is a Mungatana bill that has been published. So you see, for Mungatana, because it was a Senate committee, there were no religious sector people inside the committee that was coming up with the recommendations. A few religious organizations sent their memoranda, but there were no religious people in that sector, in that committee. It was quite different in the presidential task force. I had so many religious leaders there. When we would have discussions, I remember they would tell me, "Kanjama, please, we cannot afford to throttle the church. We must ensure that whatever recommendations we make will not be misused by the state." The very same sentiments that Professor Kibwana has so eloquently stated. And I think we made very deliberate efforts, even in the design of the report, the policy and the bill, to deal with those concerns, because they were being discussed within the task force. And I think that is a key difference between the presidential task force and the Mungatana committee. I think the other difference is that we went around the country to every county, and we received a tremendous amount of input from religious leaders. And so the presidential task force report is largely the outcome of the views we received, synthesized, harmonized, and then benchmarked with the best practices elsewhere. And I think that is also something else that is important, that in the question of regulation, Kenya is not an island. The challenges we are facing of religious extremism have been there in the United Kingdom, in the United States. There was a certain Jones who did something similar to Shakahola, I think in 1979. So it was very useful to see what is happening in other countries. And we avoided the temptation of compelling everyone who is engaged in religion to have to register. So those who register are those who need to enjoy the benefits of registration, but nothing stops you from engaging in religious practice in your home, in your school, with whatever group you want to. We also fought against the temptation of compelling people, and this is unfortunately a difference with the Mungatana report, who are engaged in religion from having to be registered members of a church or a mosque. We also listened to the Muslims, the Sheikh, and so on, so that we could understand the way Islam works. How do they deal with extremism? And I think we came up with a very good compromise. On the question of taxation, also we took a fairly distinct approach to the Mungatana one, which threatens to bring in taxation to churches, even though they have tried to distinguish between income that comes from tithes and donations and gifts and income that comes from economic activity. But you can see an opening to taxation. So we took a number of distinct approaches. I think Professor has made it clear that there is no institutional framework that cannot be misused or abused. Whether you set up a commission, even if it is a constitutional commission, it can be abused. And I think we were very conscious of that fact. And we thought that the institutional arrangement should be one that is designed to favor more freedom as opposed to
I think we've lost you. Jamhuri, can you hear him?
No, we
lost him.
Sorry, I'm back. Okay. Something happened to my phone.
No problem, welcome.
Yeah, so let me just finish, sorry. Yeah, so saying we try to have that approach where we would favor a preferential approach where you have religion thriving as opposed to operating only with the permission of the state, which our constitution does not countenance that approach. Regarding the comment of whether it is proper to have specific criminal laws in regard to religion or to just leave them with the general laws, I think I was reflecting on all the statutes we have in Kenya. The moment you have an act of parliament to regulate anything, you'll always find 2 or 3 criminal provisions in that statute. Even under the Societies Act, you have several criminal provisions for people who don't comply with the society's law. So even religious organizations, as they are currently regulated under the Societies Act, are subject to those criminal laws under the Societies Act. And so if they were to be carved out of the Societies Act and given their own law, there would still be a few criminal provisions, because it is not possible to have a law tell people you should do things this way without any force, any sort of enforcement mechanism. And I think for us, the question of whether the existing penal laws are adequate, when we did benchmarking and we studied the situation on the ground, because we discovered Shakahola is not an isolated case. We saw that there are other Shakaholas in the making. None of them have become Shakahola, but we found out from several security agencies in other parts of the country, Shakaholas in the making. And this was something very troubling, because clearly there was a deficit in the way the law had been designed or was being applied. And so we thought that giving a bit of clarity that educates both the security agencies and Kenyans and people in religious organizations that religion can also be abused and cause harm was something important to do. So I think I've just given a few comments to bring out the fact that the Presidential Task Force appreciated quite a bit the threat or the risk that Prof has mentioned. Of course, the outcome of the Presidential Task Force is not perfect. It needs improvements as any human device. But that was part of the thing we're very conscious about. And I would like to say, for example, regarding the concern that the Presidential Task Force may have thought of an approach that might favor the larger churches. One of the terms of reference of the Presidential Task Force was to study sects, and sects in our terms of reference were kind of like addressed in a pejorative sense. And I remember I was one of the people who mentioned that even Christianity began as a Jewish sect according to the Jews of the time of Jesus and the apostles. And many of the mainstream churches may have begun as sects when they were breaking away from other mainstream churches, and they have now become mainstream. And I think I made it clear, I emphasized as a lawyer to my colleagues, professionals, and even religious leaders that based on Article 32 of the Constitution, even if I set up my own religious organization, whether it is a ministry or whatever it is, and we are 20 or 30, we still have the freedom of religion. And I think we were very conscious. Thankfully, the sector that was most represented in the task force were evangelicals. And there was a feeling that evangelicals are the ones who have the largest number of religious organizations, including many of the small ones or the SME. And they were there to help us to understand the spirit of evangelicalism and to protect the interests of the smaller churches. So I think we made an effort to do that in the outcome of the report, and would welcome a continued engagement with the report, continued criticism, observations, suggestions for improvement. And we hope ultimately that the implementation committee will be set up so that it can receive these structured comments from Kenyans and then usher in the next stage of the intended reforms in the way religions operate within this country.
Thank you very much. Let's Talk has raised their hand for quite a while. I will go to Let's Talk, then go to Redemptor. But Let's Talk, you have the mic.
Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and for the speakers that have given their insight, and special recognition to Senior Counsel Chance Kanjama and Professor Kivuta Kibwana. I have two main concerns or questions regarding the discussion tonight. And I understand the position of self-regulation because, religious organizations, in the view of some people, should be allowed to regulate themselves, through maybe internal councils or associations that they can help them maintain ethical standards and, keep the focus on ensuring that religious leaders who have a lot of influence exercise good moral authority to reduce cases of abuse and corruption. And that is all okay. But my specific concern, number one, is that many vulnerable communities fall prey to religious exploitation, where they're asked for money, sometimes in exchange for miracles or blessings and things like that. We've had many such stories. So what steps can or should be taken to protect such vulnerable communities from exploitation, whether through self-regulation or if the state passes legislation? How can this be done so that these rogue religious leaders who manipulate them for financial gain are held accountable? And if we opt for self-regulation, is there a mechanism for escalation, maybe for law enforcement? Is it possible to get an example or an overview of how things would go if a church, say, or a mosque even, is found to have emotionally or financially exploited its congregants? What could this look like in when it is under self-regulation, and would it be dealt entirely by the church, or would there be processes to escalate to law enforcement, and what would this look like? Just an example. And then my second question, my last question, is how can we leverage technology to create a balance between transparency, accountability, and maintaining religious freedom in our religious institutions, and more specifically churches? Because as we go on and as things advance, even just by global standards, it's very prudent that to remain future-proof and to be at par with the world and how things are evolving socially and many other ways, that we embrace technology and we have mechanisms that are as dynamic as the changes occurring around us to ensure protection of our congregants. So are there ways maybe the task force recommended or is willing to consider in which we can leverage technology to achieve the goal? Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. We can have Redemptor go, then you can rejoin to both queries at the same time. Redemptor, kindly, you have the mic.
Thank you very much, Wallace, Jane, Kariuki, Jamhuri, the host of this show. It's unfortunate I've come late. I forgot about. I had really purposed to be here. I would have loved to hear Senior Counsel Kanjama's presentation, but I'll replay the presentation. Now, the first thing I'll say is that some of you know that I dedicated 12 months to documenting the Shakahola massacre. And I don't like people to call it a thing because people died. And in this case, I will tell you for free that self-regulation failed, because when now you're dealing with a criminal, can you hear me?
Very well, go ahead.
When we are dealing with a crime, then people start saying this is religion. So this is a very unique situation where in this country, I don't know if anyone has noticed, we stopped having witch doctors and we have Waombezi. So the lines are blurred in terms of, even if we talk of regulation, society itself has not realized that now occultism is deemed as church. You go to informal settlements, you find people in small rooms praying for people. But what they are diviners. So the lines are so blurred that even if we do what we do in Kenya, which is hiding Kenyan problems in reports and task forces. Now, in the case of the bill, if I can go to the bill, should the state regulate church? If the church had not misbehaved, and we have to admit the church misbehaved in the last 10, 12 years, then it would be the responsibility of the church to regulate the state. It would be the opposite. And because of that, we have very many pockets of vulnerable communities then who are then exploited by these conmen because they are not really pastors. In terms of the person who has made this bill, who has proposed this bill, Ongatana, it is very unfortunate because apart from the latest report, I think that led by Reverend Mutaba Musiemi, I've looked at most of all the other reports that came about as a result of the massacre that happened in Kilifi. And the worst of them is the ad hoc Senate committee. That was the worst. 232 pages of useless things. There was only one page in that whole report that captured what had happened in Shakahola. And so when I see them coming up with another bill, I look at it as an opportunity to hold town hall meetings and just kukula. It's ill. The timing is very wrong. It's coming at a time when Kenya is already in a very bad place in terms of our spirituality, our emotions, our economics. And the biggest thing that we are saying is, what are the levels? What is the problem? The problem is economic exploitation. In this case, I always say I read all these reports and nobody seems to capture that what happened in Shakahola was occultism disguised as a church. Secondly, it was also a man who declared in 2019, I have stopped being a pastor. Yet everyone who talks about him uses the word pastor. So now when you use it as an excuse to say, let's regulate the church, you're conning us. You're taking advantage. And I think, because, I'm very vocal about the need to liberate this country, I think people are playing here with numbers. Because the people who control numbers, the citizenry, is the church and politicians. And they are fighting for the same. So I think it's an excuse to say, let's bring a bill to regulate you. And then now the church will be begging the government because they don't want to be regulated, because if you're told you'll be regulated, you feel threatened. So I think the Kenyan problem here is people are so vulnerable. They are willing to kunywa mafuta taa, to buy special sand, to buy special nails. If we'd fix this nation, in fact, the church should use this opportunity to consolidate like they did in the 90s and save all these masses of people who are suffering. Kenya is, people are on their knees and they're not praying to God. So when you come and attack a church and say, let's regulate a church at such a time as this, then where do you send these people? Hospitals don't work. So people are still going to church for mchangas when their loved ones are sick. And then there's this extreme of people who have mental, because a lot of these, when you see over religiosity and religious psychosis, those are people with mental health problems. Those are people who've broken down. And so they find themselves in these little corners and they call it church. So I have a lot to say about this topic. So I'll just keep it to the government cannot regulate church at this time. The timing is wrong. The bill is at the wrong time because the same Senate committee, the ad hoc committee, failed 250 something families. To date, we have bodies in a container. So you can't come and tell me. In fact, I feel like the church is playing itself. The church should have investigated what happened in Shakahola. It would not have cost the church much. These all politicians should have read these reports independently without having to be in any committee. And then now they can confidently go and walk to Mungatana and tell him, do not use this as an excuse to disrupt us. In fact, the church should now mobilize around saving this nation because people are hurting and not saving themselves that, oh, now we are under attack, we are being regulated. I do not think this is the time to regulate. I'm getting feedback. I don't know whose mic is on.
Thanks, Redemptor. Maybe you wrap up your comment.
No, I'll listen. I'll really, my kind of appeal is you have a part 2 of this, then I listen to the first part, and then I can make my input. Thank you for the great conversation. It is timely, and the discussion needs to be explored further because we need the church. This country needs the church. I mean, I would love to beat the church up for their failures in the past, but if they are ever needed, it is a time as this, and not fight for themselves. Let the regulation find them busy trying to help the citizenry. Thank you,
Redemptor. Thank you, Redemptor. We'll ask Senior Counsel to rejoin on that. And of course, definitely, we feel, even when we look at the time, we'll definitely need a part 2 of this. We will extend the invitation to Senior Counsel if he will agree. But kindly, you can rejoin to those 2 speakers who have preceded, Redemptor and our previous speaker.
Wallace, can I ask something about?
Yes,
can I ask something about?
I'm forgetting. Maybe I respond to this too, then I can respond to anything else because I'll forget what has been said.
I understand.
And the speakers as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so Let's Talk was the first person who made a comment. And I think the thought that came to my mind is that there is a temptation. It is an attractive temptation about regulating or monitoring doctrine or teachings or practices of people of a different religious dispensation. And the thing about religion is that all of us who are people of faith or people who believe in religion, we always think our religion is a true religion. If I'm Muslim, I think Islam is true and the other religions are erroneous. If I'm Hindu, the same. If I'm Christian, the same. I think I'm the one who's exactly in the right. If I'm Christian and we have different denominations, I think that my denomination is the one that has the exactly right understanding. And the others are right to the extent that they agree with my perspective. That tends to be the way we approach religion. And it is to be expected because we are all looking for truth. And faith is a promise to lead us to the truth through belief. And so because of this one, there would be a danger if regulation of religion or whatever engagement of religion, whether at the level of umbrella religious organizations or otherwise, became an external test by one person based on their creed or set of beliefs against another person's set of beliefs. The approach that our courts have taken generally in matters that involve a need for religious tolerance and sometimes some conflict between religious practices is to say that in the area of conscience or belief, you have full freedom to believe what you'd like to believe about God, so long as it doesn't cause harm to others. But in the area of beliefs, if they don't cause harm, would not be regulated, and there would be no interest of the state, for example, in that area. But in regard to action, because religion involves 2 dimensions, what you believe and then what you do in accordance with those beliefs. In regard to action, there is a standard to determine whether these religious practices are good or harmful. And that standard is the standard of harm. Do they cause harm to life, to health of people, economic and otherwise? Standard. And our constitution, of course, has indicated values there, including human rights. So is this religion causing a physical harm? Is it causing this kind of damage to people's savings and so on? So to the extent that you can have an objective test which is outcome based, then the state or any agency can come in. Even if I am a pastor and you are a pastor in a different church, I can see based on the objective standard that you are misusing religion. So at that level of the objective standard is when, for example, the Malindi Pastors Fellowship came in and expressed concern about Mackenzie, both about his teachings and his practices. So that is the area where religion needs to be reviewed in accordance with the test of, is it causing good or causing harm? And for us, our basic principle was that religion is a good thing in itself, leave alone the social work that is done by people of religion in the area of education, health, charitable work, and so on. Religion in itself is a good thing. It helps people individually in their spiritual dimension, psychologically, and so on. Contributes to good. I remember we were in one county in the western part of this country, and a certain pastor spoke, and what she told us is that she's very disappointed that after Shakahola, casual insults are being thrown at pastors, and they are being called Mackenzie. And she was very offended. Why are we being called Mackenzie and we are doing so much good? One of the things she said is even the government should be very thankful to us. In all these decades, they are unable to reform people who they convict, they take to committee and to other maximum prisons and minimum prisons. In fact, the people get worse. And she told us that in my ministry, I have people who used to be drunkards, they have been reformed. People who are criminals, they have been reformed. We are able to do something which the state is not able to, even when they throw a lot of money at the problem. Even just at that level of personal change, behavior change, and transformation, the state should be very happy with what we do. But we are not doing it for the reason of the state to be happy with us. It's for a higher reason. It's for a transcendental purpose. So for me, I think that that is a sentiment that I have heard from the various comments and questions, that religion is generally good, which is true, but it can be abused. And the second comment or question of Let's Talk was about whether digital technology can be used. For the Presidential Task Force, one clear recommendation is that the registration process should be digitized, just like the way registration of companies can now be done online. That recommendation has been done, and we said it's an administrative recommendation. It doesn't need a law to be put into effect. And the Registrar of Societies committed to us that even if the law doesn't pass with the current regime of registration of societies, they have sought for a budget and they are going to begin a process of digitization of the Registrar of Societies, which will also tremendously help churches and mosques and temples and other such institutions. Redemptor had many comments. Unfortunately, she had not had the presentation which addressed some of the comments, but she also had various useful comments. And one of the ones I liked is when she talked about Waombezi, because when we were at the coast in Kwale, Kilifi, Mombasa, they commented to us a lot about this issue of Waombezi. And I was just thinking as she was talking that Kenya has a Witchcraft Act. In case you don't know, it is a short statute, but it is a statute that was used very strongly, including in the colonial times, because witchcraft sometimes involves an element of mysticism with an element of deliberate conmanship sometimes, and psychological manipulation of people. And now we were being told that you have Wombezi who organize rooms there and they pray for people, and they are kind of like a mix between expressed Christianity and actions that are close to witchcraft. And the people there were expressing concern. What do we do about this Wombezi? And of course, if the Wombezi are praying for you and they're saying that's the religion, and they're not using conmanship, they're not using psychological manipulation that is clear trickery, then that is a question of religion. The most you can do is to empower citizens to distinguish better between religion that has positive fruits and that with negative fruits. But if they engage in actions that involve fraud, misrepresentation, then that is a different thing. I can give an example. If I hold a crusade and I want to say that people are receiving miracles, miracles as people of faith and Christians, we believe in miracles. Even Jesus Christ coming to earth was a miracle in itself, we believe. But if you have a preacher who then hires an actor who comes and pretends to be a cripple, he gets into a wheelchair, he folds his legs so that he looks like he's a cripple, and then suddenly he's touched in the crusade and he jumps up and says, oh, I've been cured. Of course, that is trickery. That is something that should not be allowed in a civilized society. But if it is a genuine miracle, fine. So what we are saying is that there are people who have been involved in a lot of conmanship that has been going on unabated, alongside those who are engaged in genuine religion. And so there is need to have some interventions that can create a mechanism for inquiring into those who are engaged in open acts of trickery and taking action against them. But that taking action should not be a question of using a thermometer to determine are your doctrines true, because every person in their doctrine are based on matters of religion. And I'm not preaching relativism because not every religion can be true, of course, if they believe opposite things. But freedom of religion, which is one of our fundamental rights and freedoms in Article 32 of the Constitution, means that it is not the job of the state to determine for the citizen which is a true religion. In a marketplace, a free marketplace where religious ideas thrive, it is assumed and hoped that people who are well educated will be able to search for themselves and find the true religion that leads them to God and is in accordance with the world that has been created by God. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council. Prof, I think you had a question, then we'll go to Maura and come back to Bishop. Well, thank you for joining us. Prof, I think you had a slight question, and then we'll come to...
Yes, a very quick one. I just wanted to ask Senior Counsel the extent to which within the work of the task force, there was recognition of the developmental work that is done by religious organizations and the church in this instance of this debate, because sometimes that is not recognized, and sometimes it's also the impediments towards doing it, like whether it's in, and he didn't mention education, hospitals, all the works, because that would be an important also aspect to safeguard. I yield.
Very quickly, in the background, chapter 1 of the task force report, we've discussed those social benefits of religious organizations, including with some data in the area of education and religion. So I think it is something, as Prof has said, very important to keep in mind that religious organizations do a lot of charitable work. I think where I have a bit of a concern with the Mungatana bill is where there is an assumption that when the religious organizations engaged in education and religion, they are doing something for the public benefit. But when they are just engaged in normal acts of worship, it may not be for the public benefit. For us, we believe that the act of religion in itself is for both individual and public benefit. It contributes to peace, harmony, tolerance, and so on when it is done. And then in addition to that, of course, all this social work, education, health, other charitable work, which is frequently associated with religious people, also needs to be promoted. And one of the things that we heard from pastors and imams around the country is they were saying, please recommend that we get that is of a charitable nature or that benefits the country. And we saw that in other countries like the UK, you may not be compelled to register as a religious organization, but when you register and are recognized under the Charities Commission, you get tax exemption. The same thing in the United States of America. If your church engages in politics, it will lose its tax exemption. So there are certain things that may make you lose tax exemption, but generally, the laws are put in such a way that they encourage religious people to engage in religion, and the tax mechanism or laws recognize that this is a positive work that should be exempt from taxes.
Thank you. I wanted to give an opportunity, Brother Maura, at least now that you've been listening in, do you have some more queries regarding the same to the council?
Yes, no. Thank you, Council. Me, I don't have a question, or what I can say is something I would like to say when we are just about to close the space. I have no question for Senior Council Kajama.
Thank you. Then we'll welcome Mheshimiwa Bishop Ndicho. Can you have the microphone? Karibu.
Can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Loud and clear.
Yes, Mheshimiwa. Yes.
Thank you very much. I have listened to this conversation and this discourse since it started, and it is very interesting. I am Honorable Stephen Dicho. My Mwalimu Professor Kiptha Kibwana is my professor in law at the University of Nairobi, and he also invited me to this talk this evening, and I'm very grateful, Mwalimu. I am a bishop also of the Gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm born again. I have listened to this conversation. I have read the entire Mugatana bill. I have read the entire proposed bill by the former Attorney General Muturi on the same. I have heard from Wakili Charles Kajama that the task force is also coming up with their bill similar to all these other ones about religious organizational regulations and stuff like that. We have met severally as a House of Bishops and House of Clergy. And what I would like to tell you is that the church in this country feels threatened by these very many laws that are being made against one sector of this country, or the population of this country. We feel profiled by all what is happening. And when we look at the genesis of all this, it is Shakahola. And I have been invited to talk to various clergy, men and women, and we have gone through and thorough interrogation of the entire Shakahola stuff. And my conclusion, and this is what I always say, in Shakahola, that is in Malindi, I think it's Kilifi County, that is a place where, if we can start from where Shakahola is, there is what you call Nyumba Kumi. Nyumba Kumi was a concept of a vigilante kind of a group that in every 10 households, there is a wazee there who knows what's happening in that small radius of 10 households, and it goes expanding like that. And so there were and this Nyubakumi, they actually report to the sub chief, who also reports to the chief, who also reports to the DCC, who also reports to the DC or the county, the CC, the county commissioner, and there is also the DCI. That's the Directorate of Criminal Investigation. There is also the NIS. There is no spot in this country that there is no ear of government in the name of NIS or NIS, DCI, and the chief and everybody. This country is overwhelmingly covered by information collectors. And within the shortest period of time, the government in Nairobi knows what is happening in Turkana in the twinkling of an eye, in real time. And so what I have been asking the many meetings that we have gone is that how did it happen that 400 people died and they were buried, and yet the government, which boasts of the best information collection in this part of the world, where was it? Now our conclusion is that the government, in its failure, is trying to look for an escape of that total and horrible failure at Shakahola. They are trying to shift that blame to the religious organization, and more so the Christian denominations or the Christian churches. And therefore it is very disheartening when we look holistically of what is happening in our country. 400 people died in Shakahola, and then the church is now being blamed. Last year during the Mandamano Azimio, I think of 161 Kenyans died from police brutality. During the Gen Z Mandamanos, I think about 60 something or 70 died. And also other Kenyans were thrown into the quarry. And all those are souls and lives of Kenyans that died so shamelessly and so shockingly. Yet this country is only focusing only on one area where Kenyans died through this mishandling of a religious church by Mackenzie, and then giving the government an opportunity to profile a whole sector called the religious sector. I think it is unacceptable. And this is what I've been saying, and this is my contribution to this, and I hope my friend and Council Kajama is listening. The Bible says, actually it's Jesus who said, kila mtu abebe msalaba yake. Let everybody carry his own cross. Why is the entire religious sector in this country being made to carry the cross of Mackenzie of Shakahola? Why are we being blamed? And why are we being profiled about how we worship and all this kind of stuff? Just because the government failed to arrest a situation where a wayward person committed those tragedies and those crimes. I also want to contact this, that if Bishop Stephen Dicho commits a crime, go for Stephen Dicho and apply the provisions of the CP, the Criminal Procedure Code or the Penal Code, apply it on Bishop Stephen Dicho and leave the others alone. If somebody commits a crime, go for him, because our set of laws are very clear on how every criminal should be arrested, charged in court, in a competent court of law, and even the court of law punish that person in jail or whatever other punishment. Why punish the whole entire sector because of the failure of one individual called Mackenzie? It is unacceptable. And we as the church, Charles, Kajama, Council, we are taking an action, because we must stop this
profiling. We are looking at the Constitution, Article 27 on discrimination. I think what is going on is discrimination against the Christian fraternity in this country from this government, either through that presidential, what do you call,
task force.
It is discrimination. We also feel that the name or the word religious organization is an omnibus to carry almost everybody, but the target is the Christians in this country, and more so the Pentecostal. And I would like to bring to your attention, Council Kajama, there's a whole world of difference between evangelical Christians or Evangelical Alliance of Kenya and the Pentecostal churches. Actually, the Pentecostal formation of the Christians is the largest single organization in this country, more than evangelicals, more than Presbyterians, more than Anglicans, and more than even the Muslims. It is those small churches you see in every small village, including those in Turkana, where these people are talking about not interfering with the elders. Those are Pentecostals. I read through the Attorney General's bill where it's talking of a commission that is going to be formed. In that commission, the evangelicals are there, the Presbyterians are there, the NCCK, the Catholic Conference of Bishops is there, the Anglicans, the Muslims, Hindus, but the Pentecostals have even been left out in that draft format, which is discrimination, is unconstitutional. So what we are saying, Wakili Kajama, I would be very eager to see your proposed bill on this regulation. And I'm also saying the word regulation is a bit soft. What is intended in this country is to control the religious sector, to control the churches. And this is reminiscent of what happened in the communistic Russia or the former USSR, where religion was completely controlled and where even to be found with a Bible was a crime. If you're caught with the Bible during the USSR regime, it was just but to be hanged. People used to read their Bibles under their beds and under their blankets. Today, those countries that still oppose gospel preaching, we thank God because of telephony technology. Because everywhere in this world today, you can download your Bible in your telephone and read it and get to know all what's happening in the world. So, to cut my long story short, I am saying that Wakili Kajama, tell the president, he is your friend, and tell the government that this country feels, the church in this country feels intimidated. It feels it is being discriminated. It feels it's being profiled, and especially after this, after the religious sector and especially the church was used by the politicians to politic and get their votes. I saw an article in the Attorney General's bill, which says that if a pastor or a bishop allows a politician in his church to advance his political party manifesto or himself as a politician, I think the fine is 5 million shillings, or I think 3 years imprisonment, or both. And then we ask him, the president used that and he got the votes to be the president. Now he is bringing a law and we are interpreting it to mean that he does not want any other person to take advantage of the church where he took advantage, so that nobody else will take that advantage and be elected. And therefore, I've gone for 10 years, And I remember we operated under the old constitution. And I used to raise an issue then that we don't need what you call freedom of freedom of worship. I used to contend that worship is an inherent, it's inherent upon, it's incumbent upon every human being to worship his creator. And therefore you don't need anybody to give you freedom. Because whosoever gives you freedom, whoever gives you freedom can deny you that freedom. And therefore we don't need that religious freedom. But what was put in the constitution is right to the freedom of worship, to the freedom of religion. Because a right is a right, and nobody can interfere with your right. And therefore, when also the constitution, Wakili Kajama, talks about every person has got equal opportunity, either himself or with others, to worship. I think if you read that article, Wakili, and I would like you to look at it critically, and I would like to read it for you. I think it's that 2 and there's sabbatical 2. Every person has the right, either individually or in the community of others, in public or in private, to manifest any religion or belief through worship, practice. I don't know whether I'm still on.
We can still hear you. You can land in a minute.
I'm finishing. Practice, preaching, or observance include. Now, this is talking about persons, either individually alone or in community of others, to go somewhere, either in a public place or in a private place, and worship. Now, if you can take a public place, it's like the church, what you are calling the church today. So where does legislation of this religion now come in? Actually, this article outrose registration of churches and religious organizations, because it's talking that every Kenyan has got a right, himself individually or in community with others, to go and worship. Where I'm not as an old lawyer like you are in practice, but I would like you to explain to us and Kenyans how Article 2 relates with the registration of churches when it is saying that every Kenyan individual or in community with others have got a right. I think, let me stop there. Next time I will join in and bring more, but I can tell you that we are going to quote to stop the authorization of this Mungatana bill, because it has already been gazetted. I think it is ready for debate in the House, in the Senate, but we must also take some legal action against, because it is draconian, punitive to the religious sector in this country, and we can't allow it. Thank you very much for listening to me. If my contribution submission was too long, I beg to be bear with me. Thank you very much, host.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Bishop, for your submission. Just before Senior Counsel gives his rejoinder, we'd like to note, yes, we for those who still have mics and have not asked their questions, we know we've run out of time. Usually we want to run from 7:30 to 9:30, but we extend when the discussion is robust and we can see that things are still yet to be mentioned. And we'll, of course, invite for a continuation of this discussion, because we can feel that there's many things that are yet to be covered well, or fully. So we'll request Senior Counsel to give his brief rejoinder, and then we will plan on how we will catch up in the next session and maybe continue on this, if he's, of course, and I hope he'll be able to avail himself for the same. So, Senior Counsel, you can go ahead.
Before Senior Counsel talks, just 1 second, please. I would like to propose that we are supporting self-regulation. And actually, as a lawyer, I'm drafting what we call a charter on self-regulation for the religious sector. So what we want, Senior Counsel, leave the churches alone. We want to self-regulate ourselves. We don't want to be regulated by government. We don't want to be controlled by government. Actually, the question is that I would like to pose to you, who is controlling government? Who is regulating government?
Thank you.
All the tragic days are going on. Who is at why control and regulate church when atrocities are happening to the people of Kenya? Who is controlling those people? And then only come and control the religious sector.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Bishop. Yes, we can agree that part of the discussion even next time will be even that self-regulation. Part of the discussion can be what's the best solution for us to implement in that dimension, so that everybody is engaged. Because definitely we know there's a problem in the church. Maybe what people are definitely sure about is they don't feel maybe the government has the moral authority to be the one regulating it. But then we must say, okay, if the government doesn't do it, how shall we do it as a church for ourselves? Who shall be engaged? Shall it be, besides the leaders, shall it be the members? And how shall we do that? So, Senior Counsel, kindly proceed.
Okay, I think Honorable Ndicho has made several comments expressing the concerns of many people in the sector of the churches. He has talked about the Pentecostals and also about the importance of freedom of religion, which are very valid points. And in fact, the starting point in the discussion we've had today, or any discussion about the state and the church or regulation, is a point of freedom of religion in Article 32 of the Constitution. And I think Honorable Ndicho has brought out that issue very well, Bishop Ndicho, and he's also made reference, even though maybe not completely articulated, Article 8 of the Constitution, that there shall be no state religion. So it's not the job of the state to prefer one religion to the other. He's also expressed the fear that the whole exercise that is going on is targeting Christian churches, even though it may not state so directly. So those are genuine concerns that are being expressed by people in the religious sector. There's also a concern about several initiatives targeting a religious sector or churches. And naturally, because of that concern, there's also confusion. And it's not easy to distinguish one proposal from another. So I think I have summarized my understanding of the concerns of Bishop Ndicho, and his last recommendation is, can we leave the churches to regulate themselves? When we went around the country, in fact, that was the most consistent feedback we got, that the religious leaders favor self-regulation, and they favor self-regulation through umbrella religious organizations. And I think the reason why they mentioned umbrella religious organizations is because there was an awareness, as has been mentioned by Redemptor here, who has made a comment about how she went to document from Malindi what had happened in Shakahola, that there's a recognition that if you have self-regulation at the level of your church or your religious organization, if you are Mackenzie, the Mackenzie will still happen because you'll be regulating yourself. There'll be nobody to control you. And I think when we went around the country, we found out that it is not only Mackenzie. There have been various other instances of religious extremism, including current ones that are in the making. So for us, I think it became clear that Mackenzie was just the one that had manifested in a dramatic way, but that if we did not come up with any recommendations, other Mackenzies were in the making. I think when you look at the task force report, it begins by making reference to various incidents of religious extremism in Kenya. And many of the ones we mentioned involved terrorism that was linked to Islamism, like at Garissa University, at Dusit Hotel in Nairobi, at Westgate, at the American Embassy. So I think there was a recognition. In fact, when you were at the coast, we found very useful feedback because we were in town hall meetings which had both Muslim and Christian religious leaders. Some of them were already collaborating in interfaith committees. And they told us that they recognize that religious extremism can arise from Islam, it can arise from Christianity, or indeed any other religion. And the reason extremism arises is not because of the religion by definition, but the human beings who interpret the religion in a particular way. So I think there was that recognition. And we also realized that religious extremism is not just a Kenyan phenomenon. We studied instances of religious extremism elsewhere and the responses that had been taken by people elsewhere. I think what was clear in most of the places we went to is that the religious leaders said we can no longer bury our heads in the sand. They were the ones who were most candid with us. And they said, we've seen some of our brothers and sisters misusing religion. Both mainstream churches and the smaller, you could call them SME. No, SME is not a good word because it uses enterprise, but small and medium size churches. So I think, and not just churches and other religions, whether it is mosques and so on. So the truth is that we are beyond the stage where we can bury our heads in the sand. The truth is that we're in a situation where we need to assist each other. And the self-regulation, therefore, that was being recommended was the one that includes umbrella religious organizations. Because the key issue we're asking the people there is, how will self-regulation stop Mackenzie or reduce the chance of Mackenzie and the other Mackenzies that are happening around and about? And then the second thing I could say is that we were also concerned that Shakahola itself was the product of a series of failures, most of them government failures. And we were asking ourselves,